Hemant, what an absolute pleasure to have you join us here at the Conclave. Thank you very much for your time. I know it's been a busy schedule for you as well, so we appreciate you being here this morning. Let's start by talking to you about India, Hemant, and where you see India at this point in time in the context of the kind of investments you're making. As Chandra pointed out, you've got a war chest of $8 billion that you're putting to use. So let's start with the bet on India.
Yeah, look, we're extremely bullish on the opportunity here. One of the main reasons is around this whole thesis we have called global resilience. And if you think about what the world's gone through over the last few years with pandemic, wars, energy crises, all the polarization, every country is thinking about how to make their core industries resilient. And to us, those industries are defense, healthcare, financial services, energy, industrials. These are the same industries we focus on in the US with that same lens as well. And, with the growth market here, and the decoupling that's happening between the West and China, India's got an amazing opportunity to be a leader in that. And so the timing is fantastic in that regard. And the other thing I would say is, last few years, some of the IPOs that have happened, I think that's aspirational for the entrepreneurial community here to go do more of that. And so entrepreneurs feel ready, the geopolitics of it is ready, and the country itself is in a high growth phase. So from our standpoint, it's quite interesting.
You talked about IPOs, and let's talk about the big one, which has just happened, and that's Swiggy. And I'll start by talking to you about quick commerce, because that's a bet that you're doubling down on here in India. You've invested in Zepto, which is, of course, now moved to Bengaluru as well. What's the bet on quick commerce? Why is it that quick commerce as a business model has worked here in India? It's being now touted as the big Make in India for the world story, perhaps, at least to start with, Make in India for India story. In fact, Adit Palicha calling it the next big UPI-like moment for India. Why do you believe quick commerce is uniquely working in India and your bet on it?
Well, look, first of all, it's a great consumer experience. So when I talk to folks everywhere I travel in India, and wherever the service is available, I generally hear very delighted customers. And I think the reason it's interesting for us is not only because quick commerce itself is a good experience, but the infrastructure that's getting built as a result of it, to your point about UPI, is quite profound. And that team, I'm a student of founders that build category-defining companies. I just think Adit and team are incredible, and their aspirations are to think much more beyond quick commerce in terms of what they're trying to build. And we're excited to be part of it.
Let's talk about AI now. And most people that we've been speaking to, companies that are in the midst of driving their own AI capabilities and capacities, as well as people who are on the outside looking at where things stand. And the consensus view is that we're at the infancy of an AI supercycle. How do you see things playing out from here?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you look at it. You would actually say a lot of this started in 2007 when you had iPhone, Facebook Connect, and Amazon Web Services all getting put together, and you went down this digitization of society. That's sort of when it started. And that led to a lot of aggregation of data in the cloud. You started activating AI capabilities that have been around for decades. And you went to, it was big data, then it was machine learning, and then with enough data and compute, you were able to activate the transformers. So one way you could say is actually a continuum.
Yeah.
On the other side, you would say the activation of the language models is an interesting discontinuous moment, and it has some pretty profound implications. And we kind of look at every industry, every business function, and how is it fundamentally going to transform with applied AI, sort of leveraging these tools. And some of the progress we're making in the US with our companies, it's stunning how fast.
Give me examples.
So we do a lot of work in healthcare. It's about 20% of what we do. Over the last year, we have deployed the Scribe tools, and it's in the middle of being deployed in the largest health system in the country, HCA, through a company that I started several years ago called Commure. And we also have a company called Hippocratic AI that's building an agentic nurse. And nurses in the US used to cost $90 an hour, and Hippocratic actually gives you a fully automated, empathetic, agentic nurse at $9 an hour. Transforms how health systems actually think about care models for their team. These are all being deployed enterprise-wide. Most of AI in the enterprise is stuck in pilots. And there's reasons for that, but there are some examples like this that give me a lot of hope that I think as we figure out the deployment models, this stuff's going to impact the adoption of AI quite fast.
So where we, going from the pilot to actual deployment? Are we closer to that breakout point, the breakout moment?
It depends. So here's the way I think about the problem. At the base level, you have foundational models. There's a lot of capital going in. You've got 6 or 7 folks, and we can debate if India should have its own or not, but there's a lot of capital sort of creating that. Then you have small models being built on top that are industry specific. So Hippocratic was an example of a healthcare model. We're actually doing it in media because that industry wants a clean model. You got biology, sort of every industry. Then you have to think about, do you have the data infrastructure that can deploy these models into the enterprise? And then you say, well, if all that is true, you're essentially introducing an AI workforce, a set of agents sitting next to a set of humans, metaphorically. And if that's what's happening, what is the workflow going to look like in a company? What does a culture look like? Those are complex topics. Yeah. So everybody's doing POCs, but there's a reason why this stuff hasn't been deeply penetrated, except where a few of us are going and sort of taking a system-wide view. But over the next few years, this is where I think progress is going to get made.
You preempted my question, so let me ask you that. The comment that you just made, should India work on having its own LLM? What kind should we actually focus on?
Yeah, so I had this really interesting conversation with one of the business leaders here in India, and he said, rupee was 35 rupees to a dollar in 1990, and today it's mid-80s. Yeah. And that's for the simple reason that we don't have our own energy here. And I think if you take the long view and you said you're not going to have your own intelligence infrastructure or compute infrastructure, that problem is going to keep perpetuating. So if you take the long view, I do think India needs to think about its own infrastructure all the way from semiconductors to foundation models. Now, it's not ready to do all of that today. So I think this has to be a long game, and the right industry and the government itself needs to be thinking about how do we really get there, because otherwise there will be a disadvantage as this technology really starts to power more and more of the economy.
We're probably sitting here in the midst of a lot of startups as well, and this takes me back to, I think, a piece that you and Fareed did for HBR, where you talk about whether startups can actually thrive in an AI era. So let me toss that across to you. Given the fact that at this point in time, the power is being leveraged by big tech, and big tech is really driving the AI game, I mean, what room do startups have to play with?
Yeah, so we wrote that piece because of the observation that when ChatGPT happened, one of the most valuable use cases was actually code generation. And who, from a market share perspective, owns that today? Microsoft with GitHub Copilot. Obviously, there's a bunch of startups who are investing as well. But the value accrued to a big company, not a little company, on a new technological shift. Yeah. So in Silicon Valley, one way to look at our business is we basically fund engineers in different clusters called startups. And the advantage of sort of getting there from an innovation standpoint on infrastructure, if that's accruing to the big companies, well, what are these startups going to do? But on the other side, actually, I'm pretty bullish that AI is not a distribution advantage, it's a transformation advantage, right? Going and transforming labor, workforce, these businesses like I talked about a few minutes ago. So I think the opportunity is changing for what the entrepreneurs need to be doing. It needs to be much more about working with industry and transforming it, as opposed to trying to build tooling infrastructure only, because I do think there the big companies will fundamentally have advantage, because they have the compute, they have the customers, they have the data, they have the capital. So it's the startup advantage in that dimension actually erodes, but in this other dimension, there's a lot to do, and that's a lot of where we're focused, and we call that the applied AI category.
So how is that weighing on the kind of investments that you're making, not just here in India, specific to, of course, the AI bets that you're making, but globally as well?
I want to go back to that matrix that I mentioned, which is what are the language models that we need that are industry specific to transform those industries, and how should work itself get transformed in the enterprise? What is a modern AI marketing department? What does a modern call center look like? What does a modern legal department look like?
Does it have any people?
Well, I think it depends. Some of these are going to be fully automated, and some will have, a human interaction with the agents. And our view is that these AI native enterprises are going to become a thing. These are massive ideas. Like the Hippocratic example I gave, the market opportunity for that in the US is bigger than all of SaaS software combined. All SaaS companies, because you're talking about literally all of labor that's serving the healthcare industry. So these are massive opportunities. I think they're going to create concentrated winners. But we're heavily bullish that that's a place where startups can have an important role. And everywhere in the last 40 years, labor was offshored. And I think the IT services industry, the call center industry, everybody has to think about this. AI is going to onshore that back in terms of productivity to the Western nations. And that is the opportunity these companies have in front of them.
Well, that's the opportunity, but that also presents by way of challenges to the existing business models that play out. You brought up the onshore-offshore example as just one of them. But Hemant, let's talk about what happens to jobs now in the context of AI agents and so on and so forth. And at this point in time, industry is saying, look, we're not going to do away with jobs. Jobs are going to be replaced. They're going to be repositioned. They're going to be reimagined. But for somebody who's coming out of an engineering college today as a coder, what should they prepare themselves for? What should we brace ourselves for in terms of what the job market is going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years?
So this is a very complicated question because it's always clear in the short term, it's somewhat clear in the medium term, and then human imagination can't really figure it out in the long term.
Let's start with the short term because in the long term we don't know where we're going to be.
Yeah, exactly. So short term, there's a shortage of engineers that know how to do this. I actually think a 10x AI engineer will look different from a 10x traditional software engineer in the way you sort of use these technologies to build products. So there's a whole new category of workers that needs to emerge. In the medium term, a lot of our core industries, if you think about physicians, nurses, teachers, there's a huge shortage of talent to serve them. If you think about taking care of our elderly folks, we don't have a workforce for that. In the US, we think a lot about how do you create that. Mental health, we don't have a workforce that really focuses on that. So I think jobs are going to evolve. And you'll say where it's about productivity, you use AI. Where it's about empathy and human interaction, you're going to end up creating more sort of human jobs. So there's a transformational workforce that's going to happen in the next, 15, 20, 25 years. In the long term, who knows? We'll see where else our human ingenuity takes us that these machines maybe can't.
Okay, that's short term. Medium to long term, what should be the bets that policymakers, that governments, that academic institutions make to sort of reimagine what this potential future could look like?
I think you have to assume that a lot of the middle class that got created because of offshoring labor is going to go away. Just economics and market forces are such that that's going to get impacted. So the question is, how do you upskill as a nation, to make them be technologically more advanced? I think the current course and speed, otherwise you just have better ways to do these things and much cheaper ways to do things because, compute costs go to zero over time. So I think there is a real important focus there. We have a company that is serving automating call centers. We're actually buying call centers and then AI enabling them, and that leads to a lot of job loss in those markets. Think about countries like Philippines and others. And we are concerned about that. We actually want to work with those governments saying, well, what are you going to do with these people? Because if we don't do it, somebody else will. Market forces are such that these jobs are going to be onshored with AI productivity. So then what are we actually going to do to upskill these folks to create more local opportunity? And I do think the government and business needs to work together in thinking through that.
Yeah, and I think as you rightly pointed out, this is going to be a complex issue that we need to work through. You talked about the nursing example as one of the use cases as far as AI is concerned. And I know that your ambition at General Catalyst is to try and attempt to solve large, ambitious problems with the use of technology and specifically AI. But in the context of drug discovery, breakthroughs for cancer, and so on and so forth. I mean, those are really the large world-scale problems that we're talking about. Where are we in being able to leverage the power of AI to actually get something going on the ground?
Yeah, so look, we describe ourselves as a global investment and transformation company rather than a venture capital firm. And the whole idea is work with the most ambitious founders, create enduring companies, catalyze ecosystems, and transform industries. And that's sort of the way we think about our work. And, there's industries where AI can be heavily used immediately. So in the services part of it, it's actually pretty applicable already. When you take something like drug discovery, AI can help you maybe identify potential targets, but then you do have to put it in the FDA machine to actually make that work. So some of the way things get done isn't ready for AI to have its full benefit either. So I do think those things are actually going to be slower than people think in how they manifest themselves into a fundamentally different supply chain. And then there's some, like as I said, like different use cases and services where the models are good enough, the economics are strong, the experiences for the end users are going to be great, and you can actually do that stuff today.
You know, I want to address the issue that we were just talking to Rajiv Chandrasekhar about as well, and which is innovation is traditionally always outpaced regulation, and we're seeing this play out even in the context of AI. And whether it's the US or here in India, you know, what should you regulate? How should you regulate? Who should regulate? Who puts in the guardrails? I think all of those are open questions at this point in time. How do you look at the regulatory challenge? How do you also look at the fact that as we enter this AI era, there needs to also be a harmonization as far as regulation is concerned?
So I always think about it at global level, country level, and then as a company level. At the global level, I think with AI, we just want to make sure we're not developing these technologies in a way that they can be harmful, and all the imagination of the sci-fi companies sort of, you know, you guys can all think about that. At a country level, I think every country needs to think about the fact that if it's going to be a source of competitive advantage, and you regulate progress at the infrastructure layer, you will be disadvantaged. And you know, Europe's the biggest victim of that. We're actually working with different countries and in Brussels on how to think about it in a more forward-thinking, innovative, innovation-friendly way. US is all about, you know, let's have a level playing field and let's make sure infrastructure, we win the infrastructure race. We even created tariffs on technologies to create that advantage.
Export controls.
Everybody's doing that, right? So I think every nation needs to think about, from a development of technology perspective, are they creating a source of competitive advantage and sovereignty around the intelligence layer? At a company level, I sort of look at it as, you know, we can have a responsible innovation mindset around, unintended consequences and try to be forward-leaning about, hey, let's make choices that help minimize those. And those tend to be where technology hits human beings and society as opposed to the infrastructure itself, because infrastructure is neutral. But how we're applying it in healthcare or education, like can we make sure we're not leaving people behind? So healthcare should be proactive, affordable, accessible. Are we really building the AI systems in a way that that's what the world's going to look like or not? So I think sort of thinking through these societal systems in the way we build companies and having a responsible AI protocol around that, that's something we also do advocate for.
And do you believe that this needs to be done at the core, at the very design level, as founders look at building out their companies? And I'll ask you this in the context of Snap, for instance, because I just had a conversation with Evan, and he said, look, we were always mindful and conscious of the fact that we wanted this to be a space, a safer space, and hence our problems are very different from the Metas and the TikToks of the world. So at the design stage, as an investor in Snap, do you believe that that's something that founders need to focus much more on?
Yeah, I spent time with Evan and Bobby. They were on campus at Stanford, and I don't know if folks remember when the app actually started. It was the original place we were getting a lot of traction was sexting. And so we spent a lot of time with them saying, are they creating that, or is technology kind of just going in that direction, and then they have a path to navigate the community into the right directions? And they were very well-intentioned. So I think the mindset and the mechanisms of the company matter. Technology is always neutral. You can see it go in, think about nuclear. You can build bombs, or you can have, clean power. So that digital infrastructure is the same way in a lot of ways. And so to us, it comes down to the mindset of the entrepreneurs and what are they trying to do.
So let's talk about what's happening in the US. You've got a Trump administration that will take office in January. You've also got Elon Musk playing a very crucial role in what government does or doesn't do. What do you make of this Vivek Ramaswamy-Elon Musk combination to unleash the innovation spirit and innovation quotient in America?
Look, it's not a surprise. It goes back to my global resilience comment. Just like every other country needs to think about what's best for them, the United States is doing the same thing. My personal view is there's some good and some bad in that. I think if you want to build American companies that are uniquely advantaged in the American market, this behavior will serve well. But American companies have actually typically been global companies. And so if we lose followership in the world, we're going to lose that opportunity as well. So I do think sort of being careful about long-term goals of how we build these companies, and prioritize them just as much as how do we make sure the market opportunity in the U.S. is protected for U.S. companies, which is where a lot of that sort of focus is today. I do think that's going to be important, and I'm hopeful that rational behavior will prevail there from a business leadership perspective. So what, the behavior
currently is not rational?
No, I'm not saying it's not irrational. I'm just saying that in the end, I think the CEOs and the founders are going to make the right choices to build companies that truly can be market leaders globally.
We're getting a perspective from you on what's happening in the Valley, and it's been a fairly polarized state of play, to put it mildly. The kind of friction that we're seeing play itself out today, what could the implications be on the way that technology shapes from here on, how technology goes global? Because many of the people that we're talking about are the cast of characters who are probably going to have influence and say in the way that the US determines its policy.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is really the first time politics has really infiltrated the Valley. We've generally stayed away from that. And as a firm, we had made a sort of resolution, we passed a resolution at our board level that we will not take any positions and stay nonpartisan and focus on working with any administration that comes in and be good partners to them from a business standpoint. And I really do believe that is the right way to engage. But some folks are very heated about what they think is a loss of opportunity and what, frankly, this election represents. You do have to respect the democracy and say there's enough people in the country that are being left behind that it needs to be addressed. So I'm not judging it, but I do believe that administrations come and go. As business leaders, we should be thinking about on a much more longer-term horizon than not. And Valley, to me, hasn't been so mature in this area because it's not something we really dealt with before. So I do think it's a new muscle in the Valley.
How are you dealing with it, or how are you going to learn to deal with it since it hasn't been something which has been part of the behavior set so far?
Listen, we engaged a lot with the last administration. I actually did the responsible AI protocol with Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, and we're going to engage with the new administration. Our team in DC is actively working with them and making sure we can provide our business perspective in how these industries really ought to be transformed, because that really is what this is about. It's about a transformation of the country's economic systems, and we want to have a voice in it, and we want to bring the entrepreneurs that we work with that can make a difference there.
You're talking about entrepreneurs, and I want to ask you this in the context of what you're seeing happen here in India. Of course, the IPO market is one of the big changes that we've seen. Exit options are real now. But what do you see as the big difference between founders and the way that they're thinking about running their businesses today, building their businesses today, versus maybe 10 years ago?
Well, I think the business has changed fundamentally, because before it was the role of technology company was to be an efficiency enabler in different industries and for consumers. Now the ambition and the opportunity for entrepreneurs is far greater, right? We actually have gone from selling software to doctors to building healthcare institutions, selling insurance solutions to actually building insurance companies. So I think that ambition is greater, and the duration it takes to build those companies is greater. So the very best entrepreneurs are just taking on bigger and bigger problems, and that's actually one of the places where we're trying to actively innovate. I don't think the traditional venture capital product that we had as an offering for founders is enough for those founders to build companies that are going to take 20, 30, 40 years and can play a role in these transformations. So we're also innovating to say, what else do they need? And can we actually create the financial apparatus as well as an ecosystem apparatus for them to be successful at that?
You talked about the change in mindset as well as ambition and aspiration of Indian founders, the aspiration to build companies here in India and to take them global. We've seen that play out successfully as far as the SaaS story is concerned. Where do you see that next big wave, so to speak?
Look, I think when you look at how India is going to transform its own core sectors, every one of those, and you're seeing this in the financial services sector already, is an opportunity to leapfrog the world. And if you can make it work here, you're making it work at scale, and you're making it work with a significant cost effectiveness by definition. Well, that gives you the opportunity to be globally competitive. And so I think the work that gets done in thinking about the healthcare infrastructure here, the work in advanced manufacturing, the supply chain that's getting created, every one of these industries that I referenced earlier, you theoretically should be able to create companies that become massive in India, but then have the opportunity to keep compounding because they should have a global opportunity.
So how much of that war chest is actually going to be deployed and put to use here in India?
Said approximately about 10-ish%. I mean, I think that's a number that generally feels right in the context of how much capital is generally getting deployed here. But I do think over time, if we're right about the opportunity here, that number is also going to grow, as we think about the next few years.
I was watching the a podcast that you did where you talk about some of the lessons learned over the past 20 years of being an investor, and you said humility is one of the big ones that you had to not just sort of learn, but also nurture as an attribute that you value. Why is that?
Well, none of us have a view into the future, and the problem is, as you become part of more and more companies that have gone and changed the world, it creates a lot of bias in your mind.
Is there an AI bias today?
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens with these companies. But I do think, I mean, I actually went to one of my partners who runs our healthcare fund 2 years ago, and I said, I've done so much in healthcare that everywhere I look, I see problems. But that's because I've lost my ability to be first principled about innovating. 10 years ago, that was not the case. I was like, I need to take a break, because I'm just going to make mistakes otherwise. And I just think the problem, the curse of being an investor is the more you know, the less likely you're going to bet on the most interesting ideas, because your own thinking gets in the way. It's the opposite of being an operator. The more you know it, the more sort of successful you are at operating, because you can build teams and execute. So I think keeping a nimble mind gets harder and harder the longer you do it. And so it gets hard to sustain great returns over time.
Let me ask you this in the context of AI and consumers. We're now talking about AI PCs, we're talking about wearables and so on and so forth. In terms of form factors, and how AI is actually going to touch the lives of regular people like you and me, what should we expect? I mean, what does the future look like? What is exciting at this point in time?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, I think, did we know in '06 it was going to be the iPhone was going to be the phone metaphor? And we see a lot of technology. People are innovating with earpieces because voice is interesting. There's so much interface technology that's being developed. It's kind of interesting. AR, VR is maturing. It's going to have a life of its own as well. I think it's going to be interesting to see how do we interface with it, with the intelligence that's getting built. I have a better idea of how to anticipate what that could be than like how are we going to use this, because consumer ideas are very hard to foresee.
So,
and I do think consumer is going to become a very interesting area now to unleash the power of AI and how we consume it.
Over the next few years, 5 years, or is it still going to be a longer horizon?
I think next few years. We're already seeing more and more entrepreneurial energy around consumer.
So what we've talked about the opportunities at this point in time, and the headroom for growth seems immense given everything that we know today. But what do you foresee as the big challenges? What do you see as the big risks? What could be the speed bumps?
So in India, it's a culturally a different place than doing investing in the US. And the reason is because the incumbent businesses are extremely entrepreneurial themselves. And so I think when you think about industries transforming, how much of that's going to be done by the larger conglomerates, because they themselves are so entrepreneurial.
Do monopolies worry you?
I won't use that word, but like versus new startups. And so our view has been collaborating around the emerging entrepreneurs and the existing entrepreneurs and innovating sort of together. It's sort of it's a theory that I have that might be able to build new companies that can endure and be interesting. I think traditional venture capital by itself, is that going to lead to, what percentage of transformation of the country is going to be done by that? Probably less than what some of the bigger companies are going to do themselves, because they are very ambitious.
Since we're talking about risk, let me ask you about a potential risk specific to India, and I'm sure it plays out different ways in different jurisdictions, but ownership, Indian ownership versus foreign ownership, and a large part of the venture funding has come in on account of foreign capital at this point in time, so a large number of the Indian startups are technically foreign owned. Perhaps a change in the regulatory environment in India, is that a concern potentially as a foreign investor?
That concerns me less. The dynamics of the regulatory environment concerns me more. I think what you want is stability to say, here's the framework. And obviously India is on this growth path, so it itself is figuring out what those frameworks should be. So there's like a lot of innovation in policy itself. And that induces risk in, well, what policies are you building the companies towards, like what happened in fintech here. So for me, part of the collaboration I think that can happen between the entrepreneurial and the business community and the government is around just stabilizing what those frameworks are. because then you know what your guardrails are in which you have to operate. And whatever those ratios are is fine, because the opportunity is so large. I think entrepreneurs will figure out how to adapt to that.
So you're reviewing the bet on fintech in India, considering what we've seen happen
We
in
have
the last
companies
few
here
months?
in fintech, and there's been such amazing innovation done thanks to Nandan and others that there's a lot that can be done here, but kind of depends on what is that regulatory regime going to be.
So Hemant, let me end by asking you, how much of AI are you using on a daily basis? I mean, and how much of social are you using today? I mean, are you actively on X, or given the polarization that we're currently seeing play out, I mean, do you see yourself staying on the platform, exiting the platform? What's the point of view?
So on AI, we use products like Glean. We're actually thinking a lot about how do we transform ourselves with AI, and there's a whole initiative in the firm to execute that over the next couple of years. I think on social, I've generally stayed away from it. I think over-engaging with social forces you to go to the fringe. If you're actually playing the game of being relevant and viral on these things, then I'd like to keep my sanity. So.
Likely to keep your sanity, so stay off social. That's the message. So what does that mean in terms of investing in those companies in the future?
I think that we absolutely look at investing in those companies. We did Snap, we did Discord. We'll look at what the next set of companies are, but we always think about, again, the mindset of the founders. What are they trying to cultivate? And we've learned a lot from this last generation of social and what worked well, what didn't. And I do think new innovation will happen there.
Let me end by asking you a quick question on valuations and where you see valuations at this point in time. We've seen a lot of the froth coming off. Do you believe that we're done with the correction, or is there still more room?
Well, markets in the U.S. are extremely buoyant right now.
But we haven't seen any new IPOs.
But I think IPO market is going to open up second half of next year once the new administration settled in. There's a lot of companies that should be public, but no one was going to go in uncertainty around what their administration is going to look like. So I do think that's going to open up. And with the excitement in the public markets, it probably takes 6 to 9 months before it starts impacting the private markets. So let's see how long this momentum sustains around the excitement in the markets. But long term, I do think the IPO market is going to open up, and we're excited about that over the next 6 to 12 months.
Hemant, it's been an absolute pleasure. Many, many thanks for joining us here at the CNBC-TV18 Money Control Global AI Conclave. Appreciate your time, and thanks very much for being here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Hemant Taneja.